Marry me and disappear forever, Mafia boss whispered. As she hid from her violent ex, the name on her faded apron read Chloe. It was a good name, she thought. Simple, forgettable, like her. Natalie Monroe, the woman who had testified, the woman who had run, was buried deep beneath layers of cheap brown hair dye, secondhand clothes, and a constant, vibrating anxiety that lived just under her skin. Here, at the paperback corner, a dusty, ailing bookstore in a rundown neighborhood of Philadelphia, she was just Chloe, a ghost who shelved books, wiped down counters, and never, ever met anyone's gaze for more than 2 seconds. The small brass bell above the door was her tormentor. Every time it jingled, her heart would slam against her ribs, a painful, frantic bird in a cage. Her shoulders would lock. Her head would duck, and she would force herself to count to 5 before looking up, scanning the face, checking the hands, the build, the walk. It was never him. Until one day, it would be... She lived in a world of peripheral vision. Every reflection in the warped glass of the storefront, every shadow that moved too quickly in the stacks, every low male voice was a potential threat. She was constantly checking over her shoulder, a habit so ingrained she no longer noticed she was doing it. The news had come 3 days ago, not through any official channel. She had no official channels left, but through a coded text from the only friend who still knew she was alive. He's out, asking around, Philly, Troy Lasker, her ex-boyfriend, a corrupt ex-cop with a sociopath's charm and a record of domestic violence that had been systematically erased. The case she had testified in, the one that was supposed to put him away, had been thrown out, contaminated evidence. The judge said, a mistrial. He was free, and he was hunting her. She had moved immediately. The tiny roach-infested studio above a laundromat was abandoned in the middle of the night. She'd left everything, just as she'd done 4 times before. Her new apartment, secured with cash and another fake ID, was only 10 blocks away, but it felt just as exposed. The deadbolt on the door was flimsy. The window faced a dark alley, and the walls were thin enough to hear her neighbor cough. It didn't feel safe. Nothing felt safe. Tonight. The rain hammered against the windows of the bookstore, turning the gray twilight into a premature, inky black. Mr. Henderson, the elderly owner, had left hours ago, leaving her to close up. 9 o'clock. She pulled the ancient metal grate across the front door, the screech of it setting her teeth on edge. She tugged her thin coat tighter. The streets were empty, slick canyons of wet asphalt and blurred neon. She kept to the shadows, walking fast. Her keys clutched between her fingers like a dull, desperate weapon. She made it 2 blocks. A dark sedan, engine humming low, turned the corner and slowed beside her. Natalie didn't wait. She didn't look. She just ran. She bolted, slipping on the wet pavement, her breath tearing from her lungs in ragged gasps. Behind her, a car door slammed, then another. Footsteps, heavy and fast, echoed her own. "Natalie, wait up! Troy just wants to talk to you." The sound of her real name, shouted so casually into the night, hit her like a physical blow. They knew who she was. He had found her. The fragile identity of Chloe dissolved in the rain. She shoved a pedestrian aside, ignoring his shout, and ducked into the first alley she saw. It was a narrow slit between a brick tenement and a windowless commercial building. The stench of stale beer and urine filled her lungs. Her feet pounded through puddles, trash bags ripping under her sneakers. She reached the end, a solid brick wall, a dead end. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. She turned, pressing her back against the rough brick. The 2 men appeared at the alley's entrance, silhouetted against the streetlights. They were large, blocking the only exit. They didn't rush, just advanced slowly, smiling. "Nowhere to go, sweetheart," one of them said, cracking his knuckles. "Troy's really sad you ran. He misses you." Her eyes darted around, frantic. Nothing, just dumpsters and a single, recessed metal door. She lunged for it, grabbing the handle, expecting it to be locked. It clicked open. She threw her entire body weight into it, stumbling inside and kicking it shut behind her. She fumbled for a lock, a bolt, anything. There was none. She just leaned against it, hyperventilating, listening as the men reached the door. She went in here. The handle jiggled. She pushed against it, tears of terror streaming down her face. Then, silence. The handle stopped turning. She held her breath, listening. Muffled voices from the alley, one of them angry, the other one suddenly polite? Apologetic? She risked a look around. She was not in a hallway or a storage closet. She was in a room. A large, opulent room, shrouded in a thick, expensive haze of cigar smoke. It was quiet. The only sounds were the soft, rhythmic click of chips and the low murmur of voices. Half a dozen men in suits so sharp they could cut glass sat around a green felt table. They had all turned to look at her. She was a wreck, soaked to the skin, hair plastered to her face, chest heaving, a drowned rat crashing a king's banquet. Two men near the door, built like refrigerators in tailored jackets, started toward her. "Ma'am, you can't be in here. This is private." "Stop." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the smoke and tension like a razor. It came from the head of the table. Domenico Nico Bellanti did not look up, not at first. He was studying his cards. When he was ready, he placed them face down on the felt and then, slowly, lifted his eyes to her. His gaze was not like Troy's. Troy's was hot, possessive, chaotic. This man's gaze was cold, assessing, and absolute. It was the gaze of a man who owned the room, the building, and probably the entire block. He saw everything in a single, unblinking second. The genuine, animal terror. The fading yellow-purple bruise on her jawline that her makeup had failed to hide, the way her entire body trembled. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod toward a dark wooden door. "In my office." It was not a request. The two men who had been advancing on her immediately stepped back, melting into the wallpaper. Natalie, propelled by a new kind of fear, the fear of disobeying this man, pushed herself off the door and stumbled toward his office. He rose, fluid and controlled, and followed her, closing the heavy door behind them. The silence was instant and absolute. The room was soundproof. Books lined one wall. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center. "Who are you running from?" he asked. His voice was a low gravel, calm. She couldn't speak, just shook, her teeth chattering. She wrapped her arms around herself. My ex, his name." She shook her head, fresh tears welling. "I can't. He'll find me. He'll kill me. Please, just..." Her voice was a raw, broken whisper. "Please, just let me hide. Just for an hour. Then I'll go. I promise." Nico Bellanti walked around his desk, but he didn't sit. He leaned against it, watching her. He had seen fear his entire life. He had caused it, weaponized it, lived with it. But this was different. This was not the fear of a rival or a debtor. This was the fear of prey that knows the wolf is at the door. It struck something in him, an unfamiliar, unwelcome chord of something protection. "What's your name?" he asked again, his voice softer this time. "I can't," she choked out. "He'll know. He finds everything." He noted the refusal, the bruise, now vivid under the warm lamplight, the desperation that was so pure it was almost tangible. The adrenaline that had fueled her chase and escape finally, catastrophically receded. The warmth of the soundproof room, the sudden cessation of the chase, the suffocating presence of this powerful, quiet man. It was all too much. The edges of her vision turned gray. I think, she stammered, putting a hand out to steady herself. She swayed, and her eyes rolled back. Nico moved with a speed that belied his calm, crossing the room in 2 strides, catching her before she could hit the polished hardwood floor. He lifted her. She weighed nothing, a bundle of wet clothes and bones. He held her for a moment. This strange, terrified woman who had literally fallen into his world. He pressed an intercom on his desk. "Carlo, bring the car to the back entrance. We're going to the residence." She woke to the scent of lavender and old money. The sheets were silk, the mattress so soft she felt suspended. For a disoriented second, she thought she was dead. Then panic hit. She sat bolt upright. She was in a vast, dimly lit bedroom, furnished with dark, heavy antiques that looked centuries old. Her wet, dirty clothes were gone. In their place, draped on a chair, was a thick, plush robe. She scrambled out of bed, grabbing the robe and pulling it on, her heart hammering. She ran to the door. It was unlocked. She crept out into a wide, silent hallway. Marble floors, dark oil paintings. It was less an apartment, more a fortress. She followed the hall into a large living area, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a high-walled private garden. Domenico Bellanti was there, sitting in a heavy leather armchair, a newspaper resting in his lap. He was dressed in a simple black sweater and dark pants. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "You're awake. Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse. "What did you do to me? You're in my private residence." "You fainted," he said calmly, as if this happened every day. "I had a doctor look at you while you slept. You're malnourished, severely exhausted, and you have several old bruises in various stages of healing. I have to go." She backed away, her eyes darting to the massive front doors. "Where?" His voice, still so soft, so reasonable, stopped her cold. "Where will you go? Natalie?" She froze. He knew her name. The blood drained from her face. "Or Chloe, or whatever name you're using this week," he continued, standing. "It doesn't matter. He'll find you. He already has men scouring the city for you. The two outside my club were just the beginning." She turned to face him. Trapped. "What do you want from me?" He walked to the window, gazing down at the rain-soaked garden. "I'm offering you a solution, a permanent one." He turned back, his dark eyes pinning her in place. He's looking for Natalie Monroe, a civilian ghost, easy to frighten, easy to hurt, a woman with no resources, no protection. He stepped closer. She held her ground, too tired to run, too desperate not to hear. "Marry me," he whispered, "and disappear forever." She stared at him, bewildered. "What? That's insane. Is it?" He was very close now. He didn't smell of smoke, but of expensive soap and something cold, like the night air. "I can erase you. Legally, socially, financially. The person you were will cease to exist. You will be safe from him because you will be mine. You will become Natalie Bellanti. And in my world, Natalie. No one touches the boss's wife, not a corrupt ex-cop, not a whole precinct, not anyone. You know who he is," she breathed. It wasn't a question. "Troy Lasker, a thug with a badge, which makes him dangerous. He's obsessed. He won't stop until you're dead. Or he is." The brutal, simple truth of it hung in the air between them. "Why?" she whispered, her last thread of hope fraying. "Why would you do this? You don't know me." "I know what I see." His gaze flickered to the bruise on her jaw. "And I don't like men who hunt women. It's untidy." She processed the offer. The cage of her life, a life of running and looking over her shoulder, versus this new, gilded cage. This one had walls of steel and a guardian she didn't understand, but it offered safety, real, absolute safety. It was a price. But what was the alternative? Another alley, another locked door that wasn't locked, and eventually, Troy's hands on her. "Okay." The word was barely audible, torn from her throat. I'll do it. "Good. But," she lifted her chin, summoning the last scrap of her will, "on one condition." A flicker of surprise, or perhaps amusement, crossed his features. "You're in a position to make conditions." "One," she insisted, her voice trembling but firm. This marriage, it's for protection only. It's a business deal. No intimacy. You don't touch me. Not like that." He studied her for a long, heavy moment. She was a bird with a broken wing, trying to negotiate the terms of its cage. A slow, dangerous smile touched the corner of his mouth. It did not reach his eyes. "For now," he agreed softly. The word, a silken promise. Protection. Nothing more. He extended a hand, not to shake, but as if to seal the vow, until you decide otherwise. Natalie Monroe ceased to exist on a Tuesday. Her name, Her social security number, her entire documented life was not just erased, but systematically hollowed out and replaced. The process was brutally efficient. Domenico Belanti did not operate in half measures. In a sterile, soundproof office high above the Philadelphia skyline, his family's lawyer, his consigliere, Salvatore Vitale, slid a heavy sheaf of papers across a desk that had belonged to Nico's grandfather. "It's done," Sal said. He was a man in his late 60s, with eyes that had seen too much and a loyalty that was absolute, which is why this new development troubled him. The certificate is filed, backdated 6 months. The new society is aging as we speak. As of this morning, she is, for all legal intents and purposes, Mrs. Natalie Belanti. Sal steepled his fingers, his gold signet ring tapping softly. "Domenico, I have to advise against this, tying a ghost to the family name. A civilian with this kind of trouble. It's a variable we don't need. She's a weakness." Nico was looking out the armored glass window, down at the city he controlled. "She's not a variable. She's an asset." "An asset? How?" "She's mine," Nico said, his voice flat, final. He turned, his gaze cold. "And she proves that Troy Lasker is nothing, a fly I can swat. He thinks he can operate in my city, hunt someone I've decided to keep." He picked up the top sheet, the marriage certificate. His signature was beside hers, a forgery so perfect it was more real than the original. "She's a message, Sal, and you will ensure that message is legally binding." Sal Vitale recognized the tone. It was the same one Nico used before he destroyed a rival. It was not anger. It was possession. "Yes, boss. Send her upstate. Full security detail. I want eyes on every tree, every road, every bird that flies over that property. She's not to be touched by anyone. Understood?" "Understood." Natalie was moved that afternoon. The journey was a blur of tinted windows and silent, stone-faced men in dark suits. They drove for nearly 3 hours, leaving the grime of the city behind, climbing into the rolling hills and deep forests of upstate Pennsylvania. They eventually turned onto an unmarked gravel road that snaked through miles of dense woods. Ending at a set of 20-foot-high wrought iron gates, they swung open silently. The estate was not a house. It was a compound, a sprawling fortress of pale stone and dark glass that overlooked a valley. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly isolated. It was the most luxurious prison she had ever seen. She was shown to a suite of rooms that was larger than her last 3 apartments combined. The bed was cloud-like, the bathroom carved from gray marble. A walk-in closet was already filled with clothes in her size, soft cashmere, simple silks, expensive denim, nothing flashy, nothing that wasn't her, the quiet, invisible version of her. She struggled. The first few days were a new kind of panic. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety she had lived with for years, the fear of a door opening, a sudden noise, was gone, but it was replaced by a vast, suffocating silence. There were no sirens, no shouting neighbors, just the wind in the trees and the discreet, ever-present watchfulness of Nico's men. They patrolled the perimeter. She saw them from her window, moving through the trees like ghosts. They were polite but distant. They called her Signora Belanti. The title felt like a costume she couldn't take off. She was haunted by her past, but she was also deeply unsure how to act in her present. These men, who smiled gently at her, who brought her trays of food and fresh coffee, were killers. They killed for loyalty, and they were loyal to the man who had bought her safety with a fake signature. On the 5th day, she was wandering the cavernous, cold hallways and found her way to the kitchen. It was a massive stainless steel affair. An older woman with sharp dark eyes and gray hair pulled into a severe bun was kneading dough on a marble countertop. "You're hungry, Signora?" the woman asked, not unkindly. "No, I'm sorry, I was just walking." The woman paused her work, wiping her hands on her apron. "I am Maria, the housekeeper." She poured a cup of coffee and slid it across the island. "You are not used to this place." "Is it that obvious?" Natalie whispered, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "You walk like a mouse in a lion's den," Maria said, her assessment blunt. But you have it wrong. What do you mean? Maria gestured to the house, the grounds, the unseen men outside. This is not the den. This is the cage. You are not the lion's food. You are his treasure. She leaned in, her voice dropping. I have worked for the Belanti family for 30 years. Since the old man, Mr. Nico, he is quiet, but he is not like his father. He does not own many things. He does not trust many people. But what he claims, she tapped her chest, what he considers he protects to the death. You are his now. You are safer here than in God's pocket. The words should have been comforting. They terrified her. You are his now. She was property, protected, cherished, but property nonetheless. That night, the fragile dam holding back her trauma finally broke. She was asleep in the center of the massive bed, the silk sheets tangled around her. When the nightmare came, it wasn't a monster. It was just Troy, the smell of stale whiskey on his breath. The heat of his hand closing around her wrist, the sound of his voice, that low, persuasive growl he used right before he snapped. You really think you can hide from me, Nat? You're mine. You'll always be mine. She woke up with a choked, silent scream. Sitting bolt upright in the dark, her heart was a trapped bird slamming against her ribs so hard it hurt. He was here. The thought was irrational, insane, but it was all-consuming. The security, the gates, the men, it meant nothing. He had found her. He was in the house. She threw off the covers, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She had to run. She had to get out. She was putting them all in danger. He would hurt them to get to her, barefoot, wearing only a thin silk pajama shirt that had been laid out for her. She ran from the room. The marble floors were freezing against her feet. She raced down the massive, curved staircase into the grand, moonlit foyer. The front doors were two massive slabs of dark oak. She fumbled with the deadbolt, her hands shaking so violently she couldn't grip the metal. It was heavy, complicated. She pulled at it, sobbing in frustration. They won't open for you. The voice came from the shadows. She spun around, falling back against the door, her hand flying to her mouth. Domenico Belanti stepped out of the darkness of the living room. He was dressed in a simple black t-shirt and gray sweatpants, his feet bare. He must have been sitting there, in the dark, watching. It's 3 a.m, he said, his voice calm, but with a hard edge. Where are you going, Natalie? He's here, she choked out, tears streaming down her face. He found me. I have to go. I can't let him. I have to run. She was incoherent, rattling, her entire body seized by a tremor she couldn't control. He walked toward her, slowly, as one would approach a terrified animal. No one is here. The perimeter is secure. You were dreaming. No, you don't understand, she cried, sliding down the door to huddle on the floor. He always finds me. I'm putting you in danger. He'll kill you. He'll kill everyone. Please, you have to let me go. She was begging, her voice raw. He stopped a few feet from her. He didn't offer a hand. He just watched her shatter. Get up. She shook her head, burying her face in her knees. I can't. Get up, he repeated. This time, it was an order. She dragged herself to her feet, using the door for support. She was a wreck, snot-nosed and trembling, her fear a palpable stench in the air. He didn't touch her. He just gestured with his head. In the living room. Sit, he steered her. Not by touching, but by pure presence, into the vast, dark room. He hit a switch, and a single lamp cast a pool of soft, warm light over a leather sofa. She sat on the edge, wrapping her arms around herself, shaking. He disappeared for a moment, returning with a glass of water. Breathe, he commanded. She drank, the water rattling against her teeth as she sobbed. The silk shirt she wore, damp with sweat and tears, slipped from her shoulder. Nico, who'd been watching her with an impenetrable, assessing gaze, suddenly went still. The air in the room changed. The temperature dropped. His eyes narrowed, focusing on something just behind her. What is that? His voice was a low growl. What? She whispered, confused. On your back. She instinctively tried to pull the shirt up. It's nothing. I fell. Don't lie to me. He was moving before she could react. Turn around. No, please, it's fine. It's old. I said, he rasped, his voice lethal. Turn around. She obeyed. The command in his voice was absolute. She turned her back to him, her shoulders hunched. She felt him move behind her and felt the heat radiating off his body. Lower the shirt, he said. Her hands were shaking. This was worse than the chase. This was a different kind of exposure, a different kind of fear. This was the intimacy she had forbidden. Slowly, agonizingly. She gripped the hem of the silk shirt and pulled it up, exposing the skin of her back to the cold air. She heard him inhale, a sharp, controlled sound. He did this, he stated. It wasn't a question. On her left shoulder blade was a galaxy of fading bruises, a mottled, ugly cluster of deep purple, sickly yellow, and faded green. The imprint of fingers was still visible. She didn't answer, just squeezed her eyes shut. She heard him walk away, the sound of a cabinet opening. He returned. I'm not going to hurt you, he said, his voice quiet, rough. She flinched violently as something cold and wet touched her skin. He was cleaning the wound. He wasn't using a cloth or a cotton ball. He was using his fingers. His touch was impossibly gentle, clinical, almost. He traced the edge of the bruised skin with a light, antiseptic-coated finger. Her entire body went rigid. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with kindness. She had forgotten what it felt like. This is what you're running from, he murmured, his voice close to her ear. His other hand, warm and heavy, settled on her unbruised shoulder, holding her steady. His thumb brushed the sensitive skin of her collarbone. The touch lingered. It was no longer clinical. It was a brand, his fingers, so careful, moved from the bruise to the unmarred skin of her spine. She could feel his breath on her neck. The tension in the room was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. He wasn't just cleaning a wound, he was cataloging her, memorizing the damage. He broke you, he whispered. Almost, she breathed, her eyes still shut tight. He leaned in, his face moving next to hers. She could feel the warmth of his cheek, smell the clean, masculine scent of his skin. She turned her head, slowly, instinctively. Their faces were inches apart. His eyes were no longer cold. They were black, intense, and fixed on her mouth. He dipped his head, his lips parting slightly. This was it. Panic, primal and sharp, cut through the tension. This was a man. This was control. This was what Troy did. She jerked away, scrambling off the sofa as if she'd been burned. She fell to the floor, pulling her shirt down, her heart hammering a new, terrified rhythm. No! Her voice was a sharp, broken cry. Don't, please, the agreement. You promised. You promised you wouldn't touch me. Nico stood. His chest was rising and falling rapidly. His jaw was clenched so tight a muscle jumped. He looked at her, huddled on the floor, terrified of him. He had kept his word. She was the one who had turned toward him. He balled his hands into fists at his sides. He took one long, deep breath, mastering himself. The predator receded, and the boss returned. He gave a single, sharp nod. Go to bed, Natalie. He turned his back on her, a clear dismissal, and walked to the massive windows, staring out at the black, empty forest. His hunger, a cold, sharp thing he rarely acknowledged, was wide awake. She didn't need to be told twice. She fled, running up the stairs, back to her room, locking the door behind her. Nico Belanti remained at the window until dawn, watching the shadows, his resolve hardening. He had kept his word, but he knew, with absolute certainty, that she would be the one to break their agreement, eventually. Meanwhile, 3 hours south in Philadelphia, Troy Lasker slid a wad of cash across a sticky bar table to a sweating, nervous city clerk. You're sure? Troy growled, leaning in. Yeah, Mr. Lasker, I'm sure. Her name, Natalie Monroe. It's been flagged for total replacement, high-level override. I've never seen anything like it. Replaced with what? The clerk swallowed, pushing a printout forward. That's the crazy part. It's a marriage certificate. Filed 2 days ago. Her new name is Belanti. Natalie Belanti. Troy stared at the name. The bar's neon light flickered, casting his face in shades of red. He knew that name. Every cop, crooked or not, knew that name. A slow, venomous smile spread across his face. "Domenico Belanti." He laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Well, well. Nat, you ran right into the king's cage." His rage was a living fire, but it was mixed with a sudden, greedy excitement. This was not just about getting his property back anymore. This was a score. He pulled out his phone. "He's got a place. Upstate. A fortress. Start looking. Find it." After the night of the storm, the fragile peace of the estate shifted. The invisible line between them, captor and captive, protector and protected, had been breached, blurred by his unexpected gentleness and her raw, midnight terror. An awkwardness settled between them, the kind that only comes after profound, shared vulnerability. Nico was at the estate more often, his presence a heavy, magnetic pull in the sprawling emptiness of the house. He had stopped taking his meals in his study. Now, he sat at one end of the massive 20-foot-long dining table, Natalie at the other, the silence between them a canyon. Slowly, the canyon began to shrink. One night, she found him in the vast, 2-story library, a room she had avoided. He was not reading a business ledger, but a worn, leather-bound copy of some dense philosophy. She hesitated at the door, but he looked up and gave a short, non-committal nod. Permission. She found a novel on the shelf and curled up in an armchair across the cavernous room. They sat that way for hours, 2 solitudes in one space. The only sound, the soft rasp of a turning page. It was the safest she had felt in years. These quiet evenings became a routine. Sometimes he would put on old movies, black and white films where the men were stoic and the women were sharp. She found herself watching him more than the screen, studying the way the flickering light softened the hard planes of his face, the way his eyes, so cold in the daylight, seemed to absorb the old-world drama. She was beginning to see past the armor of the mafia boss. She saw the intellect, sharp and curious, in the books he read. She saw the absolute, unshakable control in the way he handled his business. His phone calls were brief, quiet and final, his voice never rising, yet carrying the weight of an executioner's blade. And once, she saw the guilt. She had come downstairs for water and found him standing in the dark foyer, staring at an old, faded photograph on the wall, a woman with his dark eyes and a sad smile. His mother. His hand was raised, his fingers hovering just millimeters from the glass, as if afraid to touch it, afraid to sully the memory. He didn't know she was there. At that moment, he was not a boss. He was just a man, haunted by a ghost. Their walks in the garden, once solitary pursuits, had also merged. He joined her one crisp afternoon, the air smelling of pine and damp earth. "You're still jumpy," he observed. It wasn't a question. "I can't help it," she murmured, pulling her sweater tighter. "Every sound. I think it's him." Nico stopped by a retaining wall, looking out over the valley. "He can't get to you here. I told you. You don't know that. You don't know what he's like. He's a cop. He has resources. He's obsessed." "So am I," Nico said, his voice flat. He turned to her. "I am obsessed with my property, with my privacy, with my wife." He said the word like a foreign object, testing its weight. "He's not your problem anymore, Natalie. He is mine." He paused, then made a decision. "Come with me." He led her not to the house, but to a low, concrete building set into the hillside, far from the main residence. He unlocked a heavy steel door, revealing a state-of-the-art indoor shooting range. The smell of gunpowder and cleaning oil was sharp. "I hate guns," she said, her voice trembling, her body automatically recoiling. Troy's service weapon had been a constant, silent threat. He used to clean it on the kitchen table while he berated her. "I know," Nico said. "That's why you need to learn. Fear comes from powerlessness. This is power." He placed a small, sleek black pistol on the counter. "It's SIG, simple, reliable, easy for you to handle." Her hands were shaking. I won't." "You will." He stood beside her, his voice patient but absolute. "Pick it up." She did. It was heavy, cold. She held it with her fingertips, as if it were a dead thing. "No, like this." He moved, stepping behind her, his body pressing against her back, her breath caught. He was so warm. His chest was a solid wall against her shoulders. He wrapped his hands around hers, his long fingers correcting her grip, molding her hands to the weapon. "You're holding your breath," he murmured, his lips close to her ear. His voice was a low vibration that seemed to travel straight down her spine. "You can't shoot if you don't breathe. From here." He laid his other hand flat on her stomach, just below her ribs, his palm a brand of heat through her thin shirt, in and out. Slow. She forced herself to obey, to draw air, to focus on his voice, on the solid, unshakable presence of him surrounding her. The heavy electric tension was suffocating. It was not sexual. It was something more primal. It was dominance and protection and control. All of it wrapped in a package of terrifying, gentle intimacy. "Extend your arms," he commanded. He adjusted her stance, his hand on her waist, his body a shield behind hers. "Aim for the center. Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull it." She focused on the paper target, squeezed her eyes shut, and fired. The sound was deafening, a sharp crack that echoed in the small space. The recoil was a violent kick, slamming her small frame back into his chest. He didn't budge. He just held her, steady as the stone walls, until the ringing in her ears subsided. She opened her eyes. The shot was wild, nowhere near the target. "Again," he said, his voice still low, still calm, but this time, "Open your eyes, Natalie. Always open your eyes." He stayed there, a human brace, his hands over hers, his breath on her neck, until she had emptied the entire magazine. That night, the sky broke. A violent summer squall rolled in from the mountains, a raw, chaotic display of power. The rain came first, a torrent lashing against the windows, then the thunder. It was not a distant rumble. It was a physical concussion, a sharp, deafening crack that seemed to shake the very foundations of the estate. Natalie woke instantly, her heart exploding in her chest. She was not in the safe, quiet library. She was in her bed, in the dark, and the world was ending. Another crack of thunder, this one even closer, sounded like a door being splintered, like a boot kicking through drywall. It was the sound of Troy's rage, the nightmare she'd had in the city, the one that drove her to the front door, was back. But this time, it was real. The storm, the violence, the blackness. It was all him. He was here. He was coming. She didn't know she was sobbing until she tasted the salt. She threw off the covers, her mind blank with a terror so pure it left no room for thought. She didn't run for the front door. She didn't try to hide. She ran for him. She sprinted down the dark marble hallway, her bare feet silent, her heart a drum. His door was at the end of the hall. She didn't knock. She threw it open, stumbling inside, a wild, broken sound tearing from her throat. Nico was awake. He was always awake. He was standing by his own window, watching the storm, a glass of water in his hand. He turned, his body instantly tensing at the intrusion, his hand moving for the gun she knew was on his nightstand. "Natalie?" His voice was sharp. The sound," she gasped, clutching the doorframe, unable to move. "It sounds like, I can't. He saw her, not the woman he was teaching to shoot, not his wife. He saw the broken, terrified animal from the alleyway. He said nothing. He simply walked to his massive bed, pulled back the heavy comforter, and gestured, "Get in." It was not a seduction. It was a command, a sanctuary. She hesitated for only a second before scrambling across the room and climbing into the bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. She stayed on the absolute farthest edge, her back to him, her body still vibrating with tremors. He walked back to the window. He didn't get in with her. He just stood, a silent guardian, watching the storm unleash its fury. "It will pass," he said, his voice a low anchor in the chaos. They stayed that way for a long time. The storm raged. She lay in his bed, listening to the thunder, and beneath it, the impossibly steady sound of his breathing. The panic slowly began to recede. "He used to love storms," she whispered into the darkness, her voice raw. He said it was the only time he could really let go. He'd get drunk, and the thunder, it would cover the sound of things breaking. Nico was silent for a long time. The only sound was the lash of the rain. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, as if dredged from a deep, dark place. "My father was a quiet man," he said, still facing the window. "He never raised his voice. Never had to." He paused. "My mother. She spilled a pot of hot coffee on his suit one morning, by accident, and he didn't say a word. He just took her arm, and he broke it, very slowly, very precisely. He told me to watch," he said. "This is how you handle disrespect, Domenico. Quietly, so they never forget." Natalie turned, her heart aching with a pain that was not her own. She looked at his broad back, a silhouette against the flashing lightning. He had just given her a piece of his broken soul, a trade. The storm began to quiet, the thunder moving off into the mountains, leaving only the sound of a steady, heavy rain. The adrenaline was gone, leaving her exhausted, but calm. Nico finally turned from the window. He walked to the bed. She watched him, her eyes wide in the gloom. He was not the boss. He was not her protector. He was Domenico, a man who had been forced to watch. He lay down on the bed, on top of the covers, his hands clasped on his stomach. He was a foot away from her, but the space between them was charged. "You should sleep," he said. "Thank you," she whispered. They lay in the dark, two broken people, listening to the rain. The emotional intimacy in the room was heavier, more profound than any physical touch. He had seen her damage, and now she had seen his. In the quiet, pre-dawn hours, when the storm had softened to a drizzle, she turned her head. He was still awake, staring at the ceiling. She moved, slowly. Before she could second-guess it, she bridged the small gap between them, rising on her elbow. His eyes, black pools in the darkness, shifted to her. She leaned down. Her hair fell, curtaining his face. Her lips, uncertain and trembling, touched his. It was just a press of skin, soft, questioning. For 1 second, he remained perfectly still, a statue. Then he moved. His hand came up, not gently, but with a sudden, desperate strength tangling in her hair, gripping the back of her head. He pulled her down, and his mouth captured hers. It was not a kiss. It was a conflagration. It was all the weeks of leashed hunger, all the controlled, cold anger, all the shared, unspoken pain erupting at once. It was a kiss of fire, of possession, of a raw, desperate need that shocked her. He kissed her like he was starving, his lips hard and demanding, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, claiming her. She didn't pull away. She met him. She melted into it. Her fear not just gone, but incinerated. This was not Troy. This was not a violation. This was a choice. This was heat. His other hand gripped her waist, pulling her flush against his side. She could feel the hard, corded muscle of his body, the frantic beat of his heart against her own. And then, just as she felt herself dissolving, he tore his mouth from hers. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. His hand was still tangled in her hair, his forehead pressed against hers. He kept his eyes closed, as if fighting a war with himself. "Domenico," she breathed, her voice unrecognizable. "No." His voice was a raw, strained rasp. He opened his eyes, and they were burning. "When I take you," he murmured, his thumb brushing her swollen, wet lips. "It won't be like this. It won't be because you're afraid of the thunder. It won't be because you're grateful." He let her go, his hand falling away, leaving her skin cold. "It'll be because you want to burn with me." He settled back onto his pillow, leaving her to tremble in the aftershock of a promise that felt more binding than any vow. Miles away, in a dripping, concrete basement in South Philadelphia, Troy Lasker wiped blood from his face. The man tied to the chair, one of Nico's men, was unconscious or dead. Didn't matter. Troy had what he needed: a name, a county, a general location. He made a call. "He's got her at the estate." "Yeah, the estate. Call the boys. The ones from the old unit. Tell them it's a high-value warrant, a major payday." In his study, Nico's private line rang. It was Salvatale, and he did not sound good. "Boss, we have a problem. A big one. Someone has been probing our outer security, not just casual, professional. They cut a perimeter sensor, disabled it, and then just left it. A test, a message. Nico stood, his blood turning to ice. Lasker. I think so. I'm tightening protection, doubling the patrols. Do it, Nico said. Full lockdown. No one in or out without my personal authorization. He hung up and stared at the security monitor. On it. Natalie was walking in the morning after the storm garden, unaware, and he would not tell her. He would handle it. An hour later, the phone rang again. A different line, an ally, a high-ranking detective on the Belanti payroll. Nico, you need to listen to me. This ain't just your girlfriend's ex anymore. Lasker's gone off the reservation. He's working with rogue cops, a tactical squad, guys who were cashiered for excessive force. He's telling them you're holding her against her will. He's coming for the girl, Nico, and he's coming armed for a war. The intimacy of the storm, that single explosive kiss, had changed the atmosphere of the estate. It had charged the air with a static-filled, unspoken tension. The line Natalie had drawn, protection, not intimacy, had been scorched away, and in its place was a heavy, watchful silence. Nico was different. The brief glimpses of the haunted man, the patient teacher, had vanished. In their place, the boss had returned, but with a harder, colder edge. He was coiled. He spent his hours in the security hub, a windowless room in the basement she was not permitted to enter, or in his study, the door firmly closed. The number of guards on the property had doubled. Before, they had patrolled. Now, they stood at fixed, strategic points, their presence less a deterrent and more a declaration of war. Natalie felt the shift with the keen, animal intuition of a survivor. This was not the quiet of safety. This was the pressurized silence before an explosion. The air was too still. He was hiding something. She found him in his study late one afternoon, the room dim, the only light coming from a bank of stock tickers on a side monitor. He was staring, unseeing, at a framed map on his wall. Domenico? He turned, his eyes focusing on her as if from a great distance. I thought you were in the garden. It's too cold, she said, pulling a cashmere wrap tighter around her shoulders. She stepped into the room. What is it? Nothing. His voice was flat. Don't lie to me. The words were out before she could stop them, sharper than she intended. Please, I know this feeling, the quiet, the waiting. It's the feeling I've had my entire life right before something terrible happens. You're hiding something from me. He turned fully, his face a mask of controlled patience. It's business. Natalie, a dispute in the city. It has nothing to do with you. You're safe here. That's all you need to concern yourself with. The dismissal was as cold and sharp as a slap. He was shutting her out, relegating her back to the status of a protected object, not a partner in their strange, desperate pact. The intimacy they had shared, the confessions in the dark, meant nothing. I see, she whispered, the old, familiar ice of isolation creeping back into her veins. I'm sorry I bothered you. She left, the heavy door clicking shut behind her, the sound of a lock falling into place. That night, she couldn't sleep. His lie was a stone in her stomach. He had lied to protect her. She knew that, but it felt like a betrayal. It meant the danger was real, and it was close. The house was silent, but it was a buzzing, electric silence, restless. She rose, pulling on the robe he had first given her. She wandered the dark, cold hallways, a ghost in her own gilded cage. She found herself drawn, once again, to his study. The door was ajar. She pushed it open. He wasn't there. He must have been in the security hub. But he had left his desk, and his primary monitor was awake. He had been so distracted, so consumed, that he had broken his own cardinal rule. She crept forward, her heart a cold knot of dread. She wasn't looking for anything. She just needed to know. It wasn't an email. It was a live security feed, a program she had never seen before. A web of interlocking camera angles and sensor grids. On the main screen was a detailed satellite map of the estate. In the top corner, a small, red icon was flashing. Perimeter breach, northeast sector. Triggered 2047. Tripwire cut. Optic sensor disabled. Her blood went cold. This wasn't a test. This was infiltration. Her eyes darted to another window open on the screen. It was a simple text file. A report. Subject, Lasker, Troy. Known associates, current. A list of 10 names. 5 of them flagged with EXPD after them. Current activity, confirmed contact with Belanti informant Gianni. Gianni is now dark. Threat assessment, high. Imminent. He hadn't just found them. He was here. He was outside. The man who had haunted her every waking and sleeping moment, the man she had crossed a country to escape, was separated from her by a few 100 yards of forest and a wall of men who were about to die for her. The guilt was a physical, crushing weight. She thought of Maria, the housekeeper. She thought of the stone-faced guards who brought her coffee. They would die. Domenico would die. All because of her. Her trauma, her ingrained, hardwired survival instinct, screamed one thing: run. It was not a flight for safety. It was a flight of sacrifice. If she was the target, she had to draw the fire away from the house. If she left, if Troy saw her leave, he would follow her. He would abandon the assault. She didn't pack. She didn't think so. She just moved. She ran down the main staircase, her bare feet slapping against the cold marble. She grabbed a dark coat from the hall closet and wrenched open the massive front doors. The rain was back, a cold, miserable drizzle that slicked the stone steps. She ran across the vast manicured lawn toward the front gates. The iron bars loomed out of the mist, a black, final barrier. She knew they were locked. She didn't care. She had to try. She reached them, grabbing the cold, wet metal, shaking them with a strength born of pure, selfless panic. "Let me out, please! Open the gate! Let me out!" She was sobbing, her voice swallowed by the rain, pulling uselessly at the tons of steel. She was a bird beating itself to death against the bars of its cage. A high-beam blast of headlights cut through the rain, pinning her. An engine roared. A black SUV skidded to a stop on the gravel drive just 5 from her. The driver's door was thrown open. Domenico. He got out, not bothering to close the door, and stood in the glare of his own headlights. He was not wearing a coat. The rain instantly soaked his black shirt, plastering it to the hard muscle of his chest. He was not the calm, controlled boss. His face, illuminated from below, was a mask of pure, terrifying fury. "What are you doing?" His voice was a roar, a sound she had never heard from him, echoing over the estate. "He's here," she screamed, still clinging to the gate. "Troy, he's here. I saw the report. I have to go. I have to lead him away. He'll kill you. He'll kill everyone. It's me he wants. Let me go." He stalked toward her, his pace measured, leonine. "You think I don't know that? Please, Domenico, you have to let me go." He reached her. He didn't speak. He grabbed her arm. His fingers were a band of steel, biting into her flesh. He ripped her away from the gate, spinning her around, and yanked her body flush against his. His other hand came up, grabbing her jaw, forcing her head up to look at him. His eyes, inches from hers, were black and blazing in the rain. "You don't run from me," he growled, his voice a guttural rasp of possession. "Ever. Do you understand me? I'm trying to save you. Save me." He laughed, a short, sharp, brutal sound. "You think running into the woods, into his arms, is saving anyone? You are not a liability. Natalie, you are not a risk." His grip on her jaw tightened, his thumb pressing into the soft skin beneath her chin. "You are mine. You are mine to protect. You will go where I say. You will stay where I put you, and you will let me handle this. You will not run again." She stared at him, her panic, her guilt, her desperate, suicidal plan shattering against the absolute, unshakable force of his will. He was not afraid. He was angry. He was not a victim. He was a king. And she had just insulted him by trying to flee his protection. The tension, the fear, the years of running, the final, terrifying realization that she was truly trapped. It all broke. A sob, a raw, ragged sound of total surrender, tore from her throat. The fight didn't just leave her. It was ripped out. She stopped pulling, stopped thinking, and just collapsed against him, her face pressing into his wet shirt, her hands grabbing his arms. "I can't," she wept. I'm so tired. I can't run anymore. I can't." The fury in his body evaporated. It was as if her surrender had doused the fire. The steel bands of his arms softened, closing around her, pulling her completely into his heat. He just held her, a solid, immovable object in the driving rain, his hand moving to the back of her head, pressing her face into his chest. He let her cry, shielding her from the night. "I know," he murmured, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "I've got you. You don't have to run. Not ever again." He bent, his arm sliding under her knees, and lifted her. He carried her as if she weighed nothing, back through the rain, past the abandoned, idling SUV, and into the warm, dry house. He didn't speak. He just carried her up the massive staircase, past her own room, and into his. He kicked the door shut with his foot and set her down gently on the plush rug. They were both soaked, dripping on the floor. He didn't turn on the lights. The room was lit only by the soft gray light of the rainy night. She was shaking, from the cold, from fear, from the crash of adrenaline. "Domenico," she whispered, her voice trembling. He stepped to her, his hands coming up to cup her face. His palms were warm and rough. "You're freezing. I don't—" "He told me to wait," Nico murmured, his voice a low vibration. "Until you were ready to burn." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers in the gloom. "Are you ready, Natalie?" She didn't answer with words. She rose on her toes, her shaking hands sliding up his chest, and kissed him. It was not the desperate, questioning kiss of the storm. This was a surrender, a plea, a choice. It was the kiss of a woman who had just given the last of her fight to the only man who could win it. He met her, his mouth taking hers, and this time, there was no fire. Not yet. It was slow. It was deep. It was trembling. He tasted the rain and a faint, sharp spice. He was giving her every chance to pull away. She deepened it, her fingers tangling in his wet hair, pulling him closer. "Take it," she thought. "Take the fear and take it all." He groaned, a low sound in his chest, and his control snapped. His kiss turned hard, passionate, demanding. He backed her up until her legs hit the edge of his bed, and she fell back onto the heavy comforter. He followed her down, his body a heavy, welcome weight, caging her, protecting her, claiming her. "I am going to erase him," he whispered, his lips moving from her mouth to her jaw, to the sensitive, pulse-jumping skin of her neck. "Tonight. I'm going to burn him from your memory." He treated her like glass, like something infinitely precious that had been shattered, and he was now, piece by piece, putting back together. He peeled her wet coat from her shoulders, his hands reverent, his fingers, so sure and steady, worked the buttons of her robe. He laid her on his bed, on his sheets. He treated every touch like a vow. He kissed the old, faded bruise on her shoulder blade, his lips a hot, healing brand. "Mine," he murmured against her skin. He kissed the inside of her wrist, where her pulse was a frantic bird. "Mine." He kissed the corner of her mouth, her eyelids, her forehead, worshipping her fear away, replacing every cold memory of Troy's violating touch with a new, warm, possessive one of his. She was not an object. She was a choice. She was his. And when he finally made them one, it was not a taking. It was a promise. A slow, deep, seismic joining that was so profound, so intensely emotional. She cried out, not in fear but in release. It was the sound of a lock breaking. It was the sound of her fear finally dying, and of something new, something powerful and terrifying and beautiful, being born in its place. In the morning, she woke to the unfamiliar sensation of absolute, total safety. Sunlight, watery and pale, streamed through the windows. The storm was gone. She was curled on her side, and he was curled around her, his body a furnace at her back, his arm a heavy, possessive bar across her waist, his hand splayed on her stomach. His breathing was deep and even in her ear. She lay there for a long time, not moving, just feeling feeling the weight of his arm, the absence of fear, the stillness of her own heart. She had been running for so long, she had forgotten what it felt in a state of rest. She felt him wake. His breathing changed. His hand on her stomach tensed, his fingers spreading. He pulled her tighter against him, pressing his face into her hair, inhaling deeply. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "You're still here," she whispered back. He held her for another long moment, and then the world returned. He pressed a hard, brief kiss to her shoulder blade and sat up. The tenderness of the night was still in his eyes, but it was overlaid now with the cold, sharp focus of the boss. He looked at her, his gaze possessive, proud. "I'll finish this," he promised. It was not a comfort. It was a vow of violence. He rose from the bed, his body a map of lean muscle and old, faded scars, and pulled on a fresh shirt. "Maria will bring you breakfast. You will stay in this room. You will not leave it. Do you understand me?" She nodded. "Domenico." He paused at the door, looking back. "Be careful," she whispered. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. "He's the one who should be careful." He left, the door clicking shut. She heard him on the phone before his footsteps had even faded. "Sal, call the meeting. Now. And I want a location on Gianni. I don't care what it takes." An hour later, as Natalie was drinking coffee, Nico's private line rang in his study. He snatched it up. It was Sal Vitale, and his voice was strained, thin. "Domenico, we found him. Gianni, in his apartment in South Philly. Is he alive?" A heavy silence. "No, he's been dead for hours. Lasker, he's an animal. He tortured him. Nico, and he left a message. For you." Nico's hand tightened on the receiver. "What did it say?" "He pinned a note to his chest," Sal said, his voice thick with disgust. "Just 5 words." Nico waited, his blood turning to ice. It said, "You can't hide her forever." The message on Gianni's chest was a declaration of war. It shattered the protective, possessive bubble Nico had built around them and solidified Troy Lasker's fate. Within the hour, Nico's capos were assembled in the estate's formal dining room. These were not the men who guarded the house. They were the men who ran the city. Hard. Older men who had served Nico's father and now served him. They sat in silence, the air thick with unspoken violence. As Nico stood at the head of the table, a single, graphic photograph of Gianni's body lay in the center. "He did this," Nico said, his voice a low, lethal calm. "A civilian, an ex-cop with a handful of rogue animals, operating in our city. He tortured one of our men, and he left this message." His gaze swept the table, cold and absolute. "This is not a business dispute. This is not a negotiation. This is a personal matter." He tapped the photograph. "The man's name is Troy Lasker. I want him to disappear. Permanently. I don't care about the noise. I don't care about the fallout. I want him erased." A heavy silence followed. This was not a typical order. This was a vendetta. His capos, men who understood the complex machinery of power, knew what this meant. Killing a cop, even a dirty ex-cop, was bad for business. It brought federal heat, but not one of them questioned the order. The insult was too grave, the command too final. They simply nodded. Natalie had not stayed in his room. The house was too charged, the energy too dark. She had followed the heavy footsteps, hiding in the shadows of the grand hallway, and had heard everything from the cracked open doorway. "I don't care about the noise." She waited until the men had filed out, their faces grim. She slipped into the room as Nico was sweeping the photograph into a folder. "Don't," she whispered, her voice shaking. He didn't look up. "This doesn't concern you. Go back to the room. Don't kill him." He snapped his head up, his eyes black. "He tortured a man. Natalie, he's hunting you. He will not stop until one of us is on the ground. I am simply choosing who it will be. I don't care about him," she cried, walking toward him. "I don't care if he lives or dies. I care about you. He's an ex-cop. He has friends. You kill him. You bring the entire world down on your head. They will come for you. Federal, state, everyone. They'll tear your whole life apart just to get justice for one of their own, even a dirty one. You'll go to prison, or you'll die in a shootout, and I'll be alone again." She stood before him, her hands clenched, not begging for Troy's life, but for his. He stared at her, the cold fury in his eyes warring with a raw, unfamiliar shock. She was not the victim. She was not afraid of the monster outside. She was afraid for him. She was protecting him. The muscle in his jaw worked. He had given an order, an absolute vow of violence, and she was asking him to break it for him. He turned away, slamming the folder down on the table. He was a man trapped between his code and his heart. "I will not kill him," he finally said, his back to her, his voice a strained rasp. Outright. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. He turned, his face a mask of cold resolve. "But I will end this, and I will do it cleanly. I will strip him of his power, his allies, and his freedom. I will bury him in a cell so deep he will never see the light again. He will wish I had killed him." It was the only compromise he could offer. A strange, tense peace settled over the estate for the next 48 hours. Nico was a ghost, locked in the security hub, his voice a low murmur on encrypted calls. Natalie was left with her thoughts, with the memory of his touch, and with a single, gnawing need. She found him at dawn on the third day, standing on the terrace, a cup of coffee steaming in his hand. "I have to go out," she said. His entire body tensed. "No, it's not a request. Domenico, I'm not running. I need to go to a place to finish something." "Where?" "My mother's grave. It's her anniversary. In 2 days. I haven't been in 3 years. I have to go." It was the last piece of her old life, the last thread she needed to cut. "I have to say goodbye to her, and to Natalie Monroe, so I can just be yours." He looked at her, saw the unbreakable, quiet resolve in her eyes. It was a mirror of his own. This was not a whim. It was a necessity. "You will not go alone. I have to. It's private. You will go in a nondescript car, driven by my most trusted man. You will wear a wig. You will not speak to anyone, and I will be in the following car, 2 lengths behind. That is not a negotiation. It is the only way you are leaving this property." The cemetery was quiet, gray, and damp, tucked into a working-class neighborhood in a suburb north of the city. Natalie, wearing a simple black dress and a dark brown wig, looked like just another mourner. She held a small bouquet of cheap carnations, the kind her mother had loved. She got out of the car. Carlo, her driver, stood by the driver's side, his eyes scanning. 200 yards back, a blacked-out SUV sat parked, its engine humming, inside. Nico watched her every move. Natalie walked the rows, her footsteps silent on the wet grass. She found the small, flat stone, Eleanor Monroe, beloved mother. She knelt, her ungloved hand tracing the cold, carved letters. "Hi, Mom," she whispered, her throat tightening. I'm sorry I've been running, but I'm not running anymore. I'm safe. I met someone. He's not what you would have wanted for me. He's dangerous, and he's quiet, and he's the only man who ever made me feel safe." She laid the carnations down. "I'm letting you go now. I'm letting all of it go. I have a new life. I hope you're okay with it." She cried, silent tears for the woman she'd lost and for the woman she'd been. She stayed for 10 minutes, a small, dark figure in a sea of gray, and then she stood, wiped her face, and walked back to the car. The drive back was silent. They took the back roads, avoiding the main highways, just as Nico had planned. They were on a quiet 2-lane road, flanked by dense forest. When it happened, a black, reinforced pickup truck, the kind used by tactical squads, burst from the trees, slamming into the side of Natalie's sedan. The sound was a deafening shriek of tortured metal. The car spun twice, slamming into a ditch, before the car had even stopped spinning. 2 more SUVs swarmed them, one cutting off Nico's chase car, the other disgorging 4 men in black tactical gear. "He's in the follow car! Get the girl! Get the girl!" The back door of the sedan was wrenched open. Natalie was still dazed, her head having hit the window. A hand, encased in a black tactical glove, grabbed her hair. "Come on, bitch!" she screamed, clawing at the hand. Gunfire erupted. Automatic. Deafening. Nico's men were returning fire from the SUV. "Get her in the truck! Now!" The man pulled her, bodily, from the car, dragging her across the wet asphalt. She was halfway to the pickup when a new sound cut through the chaos. Not the staccato of an automatic rifle, but the deep, definitive boom of a high-caliber handgun. The man holding her dropped. A perfect dark hole had appeared in his helmet. Natalie fell to her knees. She looked up. Nico was there. He had emerged from his own disabled vehicle. He was not in cover. He was walking. His face a mask of inhuman calm, a large-caliber pistol extended in a two-handed grip. He was a specter of death. Another man raised his rifle. Boom! The man spun and fell. The remaining two men grabbed Natalie, using her as a human shield, dragging her toward their truck. "Don't shoot, we've got her! Belanti, don't shoot!" Nico didn't stop. He just kept walking, closing the distance. "I said stop!" The man put the muzzle of his rifle to Natalie's head. Nico fired. The shot was impossible. He hit the man's exposed shoulder, the force shattering the bone, making him scream and lurch sideways. In that split second, Natalie was clear. Boom! The man's helmet snapped back. The last man, seeing his team decimated, shoved Natalie to the ground and turned to run. Nico shot him in the back. Silence. The entire firefight had lasted less than 30 seconds. 4 men were down. Nico ran to her, his face no longer calm, but a mask of raw panic. "Natalie, are you hurt? Did they—" "I'm fine," she gasped, scrambling to her feet. "I'm okay. Domenico, you're—" She pointed. He looked down. A dark, wet stain was spreading rapidly across his left side, just above his hip. "It's nothing," he grunted, grabbing her arm. "We have to go. Before the locals—" His knees buckled. "Domenico!" She caught him, his full weight slumping against her. "The car," he gasped, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "Get me to the car, not the estate safe house. In my pocket. Keys. GPS." She hauled him, half dragging, half carrying him, to his SUV. The tires were shot, but it was armored. She shoved him into the passenger seat and ran to the driver's side. She fumbled in his pocket, his pained grunt searing her, and found the keys. The engine turned over. She found the address in the GPS, a small apartment complex just 10 miles away, and drove, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the wheel. The safe house was a 3rd-floor walk-up. Getting him up the stairs was a nightmare. He was a dead weight, gritting his teeth, a trail of blood drops following them. She got him inside and bolted the door. "In the bathroom," he panted, collapsing onto the small, cheap sofa. "Kit under the sink." She found it, a full, military-grade trauma kit. She brought it back, her heart hammering. He had unbuckled his belt, his shirt open. The wound was a dark, ugly hole, bleeding sluggishly. It's through," he said, his voice strained. "Clean, but it's deep. What do I do?" she cried, her hands fluttering over the supplies. "Gauze," he commanded, his eyes locking on hers, holding her steady. "Clean it. Then, the needle. You have to stitch it. Natalie. Now." "I can't. I don't know how." "Yes, you can." He gripped her wrist, his hand still strong, his gaze unwavering. "Open your eyes, Natalie, like at the range. Breathe and focus." She did. Her terror receded, replaced by a cold, sharp necessity. She poured antiseptic on the gauze, her hands trembling, and pressed it to the wound. He hissed, his entire body going rigid, but he didn't make another sound. She threaded the surgical needle. Her first stitch was a jagged, terrified mess. "Tighter." He grunted. She pulled it. His skin resisted. She did it again, and again her hands steadied. She was no longer a victim. She was no longer afraid. She was anchoring him. She was saving him. It took 20 minutes. When she was done, she was covered in his blood, her entire body shaking with the aftershock. She taped a thick, sterile dressing over the crude stitches and sat back on her heels. He was pale, his eyes closed, but he was breathing steadily. The intensity of the last hour, the grave, the attack, the blood, the stitching, it all crested, a wave of emotion, so potent it was suffocating, rose in her. He had walked through gunfire for her. He had taken a bullet for her. She knelt between his legs. He opened his eyes, his gaze hazy with pain but still so powerful. "You're all I have now," she whispered, the words a raw, broken truth. She leaned forward, her hands coming to rest on his thighs, and she kissed him, not with the fire of the storm or the surrender of the rainy night, but with a deep, desperate gratitude that was almost painful. She kissed his lips, his jaw, the scar on his chin. She nudged his shirt aside, her lips brushing the hot skin of his shoulder. He groaned, his hands coming up to tangle in her hair. "Natalie?" She straddled his lap, careful of his wound, her body settling against his. She looked down at the man who had bought her, hidden her, taught her, and now bled for her. The last wall around her heart, the one she had kept protected even from him, dissolved. "I love you," she confessed, the words whispered against his mouth. "I don't know how it happened. I don't care. I love you, Domenico." She made love to him then, with a slow, emotional intensity that was a vow. It was not about passion. It was about life. It was about claiming the man who had claimed her, proving to him and to herself that they were both still alive. When it was over, she lay curled against his uninjured side, her head on his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. He kissed her forehead, his lips warm against her damp skin. He was quiet for a long time. "Then we burned together," he whispered. They stayed in the safe house for one more day, until he was steady on his feet. When they returned to the estate, the atmosphere was funereal. The attack had cost him 4 men. But Nico was no longer in a compromised position. He was no longer just protecting. He was a man who had almost lost everything. His wound was a physical reminder of his failure. He walked, stiff and sore, into the security hub. Natalie followed. He stood before the bank of monitors, his face hard as the stone of his house. The game was over. The hunt was done. "Carlo," he said into the intercom, his voice a flat, dead thing. "Get Sal Vitale on the line and find me a reporter, the hungriest, most ruthless one you know." He looked at Natalie, a cold, final fire in his eyes. "Now," he said, "I set the trap." The abandoned textile factory on the edge of the Delaware River was a skeleton of steel and rotting brick, a monument to a dying industry. It was the perfect place for a ghost to die. Domenico Bellanti sat on a lone wooden crate in the center of the cavernous main floor. He was dressed in his signature black suit, though he moved with a subtle stiffness, the stitches in his side pulling tight with every breath. The pain was a grounding anchor, a sharp reminder of why he was here. He checked his watch. Midnight. The single overhead halogen bulb cast a harsh, conical spotlight on him, leaving the rest of the warehouse in swallowing darkness. He heard the car approach long before he saw it, the aggressive growl of an engine, the crunch of tires on gravel, the slam of a door. Footsteps echoed on the concrete, heavy, confidence. Troy Lasker stepped into the light. He looked like a man who had been running on rage and adrenaline for days. His coat was unbuttoned, his tie loose, his face unshaven and wild. In his hand, he held a heavy service pistol, hanging loosely by his side. He didn't look afraid. He looked triumphant. "You look like hell, Bellanti," Troy sneered, his voice bouncing off the metal rafters. Nico didn't stand. He stayed seated, his hands resting calmly on his knees. "I've had a rough week. Your men have been persistent." "My men are efficient," Troy corrected, stepping closer, scanning the shadows. "Where is she?" "She's safe," Nico said, his voice low and defeated. "She's not here." Troy laughed, a sharp, ugly bark. "That wasn't the deal. The message said you were ready to talk terms. The terms are simple. You give me the girl, and I let you keep breathing. You try to play games, and I burn your entire organization to the ground. I have half the precinct on my payroll and the other half scared to death of me. You think you're untouchable? In this city, I am the law. Nico looked up, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You're not the law, Lasker. You're a criminal with a badge. There's a difference." "There is no difference," Troy shouted, his composure cracking. He began to pace, waving the gun. "Power is power. I take what I want. I took the evidence from that case and made it disappear. I took the witness stand and twisted it until the jury ate out of my hand. And I will take her back. She belongs to me. I broke her in. I know every inch of her fear. You think you can save her? She's damaged goods. Belanti. I made sure of that." 3 miles away, in the climate-controlled silence of the Belanti security hub, Natalie Monroe sat in front of a wall of high-definition monitors. She was trembling, but not with fear. Not this time. Her hands were gripped tight on the edge of the console, her knuckles white. Beside her, Sal Vitale and a team of tech specialists worked in silence. On the main screen, the image was crystal clear. A tiny camera, concealed in the button of Nico's jacket, broadcast Troy's face in high definition. Every sneer, every drop of sweat, every word was being captured. "He's admitting it," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's admitting everything. Audio is clear," the tech lead murmured. "We have him on bribery, evidence tampering and assault, and the threat against a federal witness." Natalie watched the man who had been the architect of her nightmares. For years, he had gaslit her, told her she was crazy, told her no one would believe her because he was a hero and she was nobody. Now, the world was seeing the monster beneath the skin. Back in the warehouse, Nico remained seated, his expression impassive. He needed more. "You killed my man," Nico said quietly. "Gianni. You tortured him." "Gianni?" Troy stopped pacing, grinning. "The little rat?" He squealed like a stuck pig. "Told me everything I wanted to know about your security protocols. Yeah, I killed him. Put a bullet right in his head after I was done. Just like I'm going to do to you if you don't tell me where she is in the next 5 seconds. "And the judge?" Nico pressed. "Judge Holloway. How did you get him to throw out the case?" "Holloway has a gambling problem and a mistress in Atlantic City," Troy bragged, drunk on his own invincibility. "I have photos. I have debt ledgers. I own him. I own the D.A. I own this city. You Italian piece of trash. Now stand up." Troy raised the gun, leveling it at Nico's chest. Nico stood. He did it slowly, wincing slightly as his wound stretched. But he rose to his full height. He didn't look at the gun. He looked Troy directly in the eyes. "You don't own anything, Troy," Nico said. His voice changed. The defeat was gone, replaced by the cold, razor-sharp authority of the boss. "You are a small man casting a large shadow, and the sun just came up. What are you talking about?" Troy's finger tightened on the trigger. "You're not talking to me," Nico said, lifting his chin toward the darkness of the rafters. "You're talking to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Troy froze. His eyes darted around the room. "And the Times," Nico added. "And Channel 4 News. The feed is live. Troy, we're streaming." The color drained from Troy's face. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a primal, cornered panic. He looked at his gun, then at Nico, then at the darkness. "You're lying," Troy whispered. "Am I?" Nico reached into his pocket, slowly, and pulled out a cell phone. He turned the screen toward Troy. It was a live news broadcast. The anchor was speaking urgently, a breaking news banner, flashing red at the bottom of the screen. The audio from the phone was tinny but distinct. "A shocking confession live from a warehouse in the Port District, where disgraced officer Troy Lasker has just admitted to multiple counts of murder and corruption." The reality hit Troy like a physical blow. His empire, his badge, his reputation, it was all gone. In seconds. He had been stripped naked before the world. A scream of pure, impotent rage tore from his throat. "I'll kill you!" He raised the weapon, aiming for Nico's heart. Nico moved. Despite the injury, his reflexes were honed by a lifetime of survival. He didn't dive for cover. He drew. The movement was a blur. Practiced 1,000 times, the heavy silver pistol cleared his holster and leveled in a single fluid motion. Crack. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Troy's gun fired into the ceiling as his body jerked violently backward. He screamed, clutching his right shoulder. His weapon clattered to the concrete floor. Nico had not aimed to kill. He had placed the bullet with surgical precision, shattering the shoulder joint, instantly disabling the arm. Troy fell to his knees, gasping, blood pouring between his fingers. He looked up at Nico, shock and agony warring in his eyes. Nico stood over him, his gun still raised, his face carved from stone. He could end it, one more pull of the trigger. It would be justice. It would be easy. "Do it," Troy hissed, spitting blood. "Do it." "No," Nico said coldly. "Death is too easy for you. You wanted to be the law, now you face it." Suddenly, the warehouse doors burst open with a crash that shook the walls. "FBI! Nobody move! Drop the weapon!" Dozens of agents in armored vests poured into the space, rifles raised, flashlights cutting through the gloom like lasers. Nico calmly engaged the safety on his pistol and placed it on the crate. He raised his hands, his face impassive. They swarmed Troy. The man who had terrified Natalie for years was dragged face down into the dust, handcuffed and hauled to his feet, screaming obscenities. As they marched him past Nico, Troy lunged, but the agents held him back. Nico caught the eye of the lead agent, a man Sal Vitale had been feeding information to for weeks. The agent gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. Nico was not arrested. He was the whistleblower, the man who had exposed the rot, in the security room. Natalie watched Troy being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle. She watched the doors slam shut. She watched the car drive away. She let out a long, shuddering breath. The cage was open. The wolf was gone. She collapsed into the chair, burying her face in her hands, and for the first time in her life, she cried tears of absolute, unburdened freedom. 6 weeks later, the town of Orr's Rest was a tiny speck on the map of the Pacific Northwest, a place where the forest crashed into the sea and the air smelled of salt and pine. It was quiet, gray, and utterly anonymous. A small, weathered cottage sat on a bluff overlooking the ocean. Smoke curled from the chimney, drifting into the mist. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth. Natalie stood at the kitchen island, chopping vegetables. Her hair was longer now, its natural color returning, and she wore an oversized sweater that hung off one shoulder. The tension that had defined her posture for years was gone. Her movements were fluid, easy. The front door opened, bringing a gust of cool wind. Nico entered. He was carrying a stack of firewood. He wore heavy boots, jeans, and a thick flannel shirt. He looked different. The sharp, predatory edge of the mafia boss had softened into something rugged and grounded. The scar on his chin was still there, a reminder of a life left behind, but his eyes were clear. He set the wood down and brushed the bark from his hands. He walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "You're home early," she said, leaning her head back against his shoulder. "Tide was coming in," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the side of her neck. "And I missed my wife." She turned in his arms, smiling up at him. It still thrilled her to hear that word. Wife, not a fake title on a forged certificate, but a real one. They had been married 3 weeks ago in the town hall, with only the clerk and a witness present. No guests, no guns, just them. "Did you check the news?" she asked softly. "I did," he said. "The trial date is set. They denied bail. He's looking at 3 consecutive life sentences. The RICO charges alone will bury him." "It's over," she whispered, the reality still settling in like a warm blanket. "It's over," he confirmed. He lifted her onto the edge of the counter, standing between her legs, his hands resting on her thighs. They looked at each other, the silence of the house wrapping around them. They were 2 people who had been forged in violence and fear, who had found peace in the unlikeliest of places. Natalie traced the line of his jaw with her thumb. She thought about the night in the poker room, the rain, the gunshots, the blood on her hands as she stitched him up. "You know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you saved me by pretending to love me." Nico looked at her. His dark eyes searched hers, filled with a depth of affection that overwhelmed her. A slow smirk played on his lips, the arrogance of the boss, tempered by the love of the husband. He leaned in, kissing the curve of her shoulder. "No, sweetheart," he murmured against her skin. "I loved you by accident and disappeared for real." Natalie laughed, a soft, happy sound, and pulled him down for a kiss that tasted of forever. Outside, the ocean waves crashed against the rocks, washing away the footprints of the past, leaving the shore clean and new. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey writing this emotional roller coaster for you. I truly hope you enjoyed the twists, the heartbreak, and the redemption of Nico and Natalie. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below telling me your country or city. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the Mafia Romance Stories channel so you never miss an episode. And please, share your thoughts in the English comments section. What was your favorite part? Did the ending satisfy you? I read every single comment and would love to hear from you. Until next time, take care.